It is my pleasure to be here this morning at the University of Richmond. It is, I think, March 23rd, March 22nd, 2011, at least I got the year right. And I'm doing an interview with Dr. Uliana Gabara, who is the Dean and Carol Weinstein Chair of International Education at the University of Richmond. This interview is being done for multiple reasons. It's being done to help educate graduate students in the field about how some institutions are able to be very successful, even when they start at a very low point, in developing all forms and all components of international education. It is also meant to be an archive for the University of Richmond and hopefully for the profession of international education, an archival tape, meeting with people who have led the field in the last half of the 20th century and the beginning of the 21st century, and transformed our field yet again from a baseline field that was at the margins of American higher education to a field that today is considered to be at the center of American higher education. Having said that, I would like to thank Uliana for talking with me today, and I would actually like to start this conversation by asking how you got to the University of Richmond. And I'm dating us both since I know you before you got here.
Yes. Actually, you know me from the moment when I got here, but I am an immigrant, though from many, many years ago. And when I first came to the U.S. as an immigrant, I very deliberately landed in Charlottesville at the University of Virginia. And that's where I spent a number of years. And I was actually teaching both at what was then called the Department of Germanic and Slavic Studies, then the Slavic department, as well as the English department. My academic field is literature in various ways. I do have a pre-existing bachelor's degree from Bennington College in American literature. Then I have a master's degree in English philology, which is an interesting title, from the University of Warsaw, and a PhD in Russian and Polish languages and literatures from UVA. So I did start my academic career at UVA, teaching both Polish and Russian languages and literatures. And then we moved to Richmond, where I continued for a while teaching Russian, when the university, as a result of the work of the then Dean of Arts and Sciences and a group of faculty, in the mid-'80s decided to address the question of shouldn't the institution think about international writ large.
Right.
And the result of that white paper was that the university announced the creation of the position of Director of International Education, who would create both the office and would implement a decision to create an international studies multidisciplinary major. That's how I got here.
Well, I'd like to ask you one question, a step back.
Sure.
And that is, and I think it's because it's very informative, how did you end up being a citizen of the United States and not a citizen of Poland? What is your earlier story? Because that story, I think, informs some of your energy and commitment to this whole field.
Right. I was living in Poland and did come to the U.S. the first time on a Ford Foundation grant, made a very conscious, deliberate decision to go back to Poland, discovered that after living here for 3 years, the situation there was very difficult, but it was bearable. I was doing all kinds of useful work, I think. And then came 1968, which was marked primarily by a very deliberate and gross, really in its full range, anti-Semitic campaign. Two parts of the Communist Party were at war with each other and settled on the usual, unfortunately, scapegoat. So the party propaganda was that the Zionists were trying to take over power in Poland. There wasn't a single living Zionist in Poland, I don't think, at that point, but many Jews were being fired from various positions. There were, of course, immediately people who would knock on our door and ask when we were going to leave, because they wanted the apartment. So it was reminiscent of some much harsher moments in history. But the government also made it clear that we were welcome to leave, but only with the destination of Israel, because they wanted the statistics to show that we were all Zionists. So we left with a travel document which said the holder of this document is not a Polish citizen. The only document, I think, in the history of civilization that stated something in the negative.
Right.
And it was valid for 2 weeks. So 2 weeks after leaving Warsaw, we were stateless. We knew that we didn't want to go to Israel, mostly because we wanted to be, in a country which I knew, or thought I knew. Bennington was obviously not a typical place for observing either America or higher education in America, but I was too stupid to realize that, and too poor, too young. And also
not because it wasn't good, but because it was very different.
It was absolutely excellent,
right.
And it still is doing some wonderfully
right.
innovative things, but it was certainly very different from just about anything in American higher education. But also we wanted to be in a country which we could leave. This whole idea of not being trapped was very high on our agenda. So this is how we ended up as immigrants in the U.S.
Right. So you went through this path that you described to the University of Virginia and finished your PhD there. How important do you think having that PhD or that terminal degree in your field was to your being able to come to the University of Richmond and accomplishing things here?
I think it depends on what one's goals are. And I'm not sure that my goals were fully articulated. I did my doctorate because I wanted to do a doctorate, and I thought at that time that my future would be an academic future in Russian literature. But from hindsight, having switched fields quite radically, I still feel that for anybody who wants to be in the position of a chief international officer, having a doctorate is crucial. And it is not only because academia is so hierarchical, which it is, but also because doing a doctorate, persevering to the very end, does teach you skills which are very important. To some extent, I would say it doesn't really matter what field it is in, so long as you learn those intellectual skills and perseverance skills and a kind of following a path to an important conclusion is what is crucial. Mm-hmm. I am not a great believer in necessarily limiting what field that PhD is in.
Right. When you got to the University of Richmond, you said that it was in the 80s. I might be misremembering. I think it was 1986, perhaps, that white paper was issued. When you first got here, before we talk about what that white paper did and the steps to change, what was international education at this institution? What did you find when you got here?
The only thing that the university had in the sense of international education, outside of some curricular, of course, components, were a few proprietary summer programs, which a few faculty members ran, the usual language abroad, study of language abroad. And as far as the curricular components were, most fields were still taught as though the U.S. were the world. You know,
Right.
a course in sociology of the family made the usual assumptions of the white middle class American family, and there were small pockets of history, well, Western Civ, as it was fondly called, was taught, of course, and was required, but we all know that that was considered to be a kind of backdrop to an education rather than a living part of. My colleagues from history would probably not be happy to hear that. But it was a backdrop, and as most requirements, they get checked off without sufficient commitment to the content. And the institutional ethos, frankly, was one that had carried over many decades. This was an institution that served the bright young people from the region whose families were neither wealthy nor particularly well educated, but very often had very, very bright young people who, for familial reasons and economic reasons, wouldn't consider applying to an institution outside of the region. And the institution did some wonderful things for many first-generation students from this area, setting them on a path to very good futures. It was a Baptist-connected institution, but without kind of real religious content. And one distinguishing feature of this institution, which I'm always very fond of mentioning, is that while most of American higher education was practicing numerous clauses for Jewish students, American Jewish students, this institution really didn't. So there were a number of Jewish students from the region who were students here. The story is, of course, completely different for faculty.
Right.
And we all know the history of American higher education on that score until after the Second World War.
Right. So when you came, it's fair to say that it was a sleepy place internationally, although a vibrant place in some other areas of its curriculum than what it was trying to do for students in this region. Why, in 1986, did the university step up to the international plate?
I really attribute that to a very small group of faculty members who themselves felt that it was no longer sufficient to educate people as if they were students, as if they were being educated for Virginia, for life in Virginia. The dean, the question of who started it is sort of being contested, whether the dean started the committee or the committee approached the dean. I've heard various versions of it, as one so often does in reminiscences. But there was a coming together on that issue that it was already a new time in the history of Virginia, the U.S., and the world, and that the institution needed to respond to that.
If my own history serves me, it was during that period too, really, that the emphasis on international education development and higher education had shifted somewhat from peace and justice and avoidance of war to global development, global economic development, global challenges, although not the way we see them today. It was primarily, I think, in the economic and business area. Do you think that probably had some influence here, that whether you're in Virginia or not, you're going to deal on a global economy?
I would doubt it,
Okay.
simply because in that group there were primarily, there was one economist, but the business school, when this whole movement started, was still convinced that there was no need for the business education to be
Right.
internationalized. This is a completely different situation now. But the initial push was really from people in the social sciences and in the in literature, in liberal arts, and it was more still from the question of content, rather the content of the view of the world, rather than from the point of view of economic or development issues.
What did the white paper charge, and what did it charge you specifically? And
Right.
so you can talk forever. How did you deal with it?
Well, the white paper essentially said that the director will start an office of international education, will start this international studies major, will address issues of study abroad and international students. In other words, one of the best things about the paper was that it immediately started with a comprehensive approach to internationalization. It was in many ways totally unrealistic, because I continued teaching 1.5 courses in the Russian literature, and so I was half-time director and had a full-time secretary. And that was that, but we were supposed to cover the world of international education.
And that was inbound students, outbound
Inbound
students, inbound faculty,
Everything.
faculty development,
There was
everything. Community action, everything.
That's right. There was essentially, yes, everything
Everything.
was somewhere mentioned.
Right.
So there were no bounds, and it took somebody who was as raw to take that assignment seriously and to try to actually build towards a comprehensive approach to internationalization. I remember, and you remember very well, that the field of international education has developed in sort of a bifurcated manner. There were a number of very good people in the field who felt that centralizing the approach to international education was detrimental to it. There was no justification for it, and it was perfectly fine to have study abroad reporting to the VP for student development, and faculty development handle everything, including internationalization, and international students be yet somewhere else, and that there was no need to weave that together. I started, on the basis of the white paper, started with the assumption, which I think has borne fruit in the last 23 years, that the most productive way to approach internationalization is to start right away by weaving a tapestry of study abroad and international student work and faculty development and faculty exchanges and interdisciplinary programming and curriculum internationalization, that only when you use every element of that tapestry to create an international approach, an international culture, can you really get the full benefit of the work of everybody in each field. So, as you probably know, in this office, nobody works on study abroad only.
Right.
All of our meetings are together, all of our conversations are about how are international students involved in getting more US students to study abroad, and how do we get them better prepared for the study abroad? How do we then try to get them to continue thinking about their study abroad once they have returned, and so on.
Right. Well, can you talk about some of the steps you took in each one of those areas, and how you continued to do something that I think is often very challenging, but you've done it exceptionally well, and that is to maintain and grow the commitment of the senior administration of the university, and also to maintain and grow the support of alumni. Both of those are challenges in this that don't often succeed because of all of the political and social and other changes that are going on with institutions, and you have succeeded. So could you talk a little bit about each one of those areas and how you managed to accomplish this?
Initially, I reported to the Dean of the Arts and Sciences, although I was from the beginning supposed to serve the whole institution. And that's a very important piece of it, that the Office of International Education serves the whole institution. Because, again, what developed later and what we see now is the whole movement across the country to try to get out of the silo mentality. It's a huge, huge challenge.
Right.
But of course, for international education, it's a crucial thing to be able to look across the boundaries of schools. So while I reported to the Dean of the Arts and Sciences, it was clear to everybody that I should be reporting to the provost.
Yeah.
And within a few years, the provost finally said, okay, you will report to me, which was a great help, because obviously the provost has the sort of purview of the whole institution. What helped me with sort of getting upper administration to support it sometimes because faculty were not as active as they could have been or should have been. It's a question of efficacy. I remember that the faculty seminar abroad, which is one of the real sort of hallmarks of this institution,
Yes, it is.
started because the VP for development had some money from a foundation that nobody used for a long time, and he called me one fine day and said, "Can you use it somehow or I'll have to return it?" Then, at that point, sort of standing on one leg, as my managers would say, I said, yes, I'll use it, I'll start a faculty seminar abroad. But again, there was something in that, the money was given to the institution by the foundation for something international. It could not be used by one faculty member to do one thing. There needed to be something larger.
Right.
And I was the only person on the campus who was charged with something larger. So the upper administration found that I had kind of unyielding dedication to continue growing this whole aspect of the institution. And perseverance is, I think, one of the main attributes.
Maybe one of the things that one learns by doing a dissertation.
Yes, that's right.
And
Yeah,
it does apply here, I think.
that's right. That the sticking to it, not saying this is not going to work, and the other thing is you have to be a factory of new ideas. You have to be constantly producing new ideas. So one of the ideas was the faculty seminar. Another one was bringing international visiting scholars, and we started with a Russian writer, Tatiana Tolstoya, and with an African writer, Amata Edu. Things that really were new and different.
Right.
And as far as the study abroad piece, I did from the beginning start thinking about exchanges when very few people were thinking or talking about exchanges. I'm still a great believer in the fact that in the present, certainly, state of higher education in the US and around the world, I do not see a compelling reason for creating American institutions abroad. I think that there's a great deal to be learned from the diversity of educational approaches. And I mean that even at the level of, for example, lectures. Lecture has become a four-letter word on this campus, and it is at most liberal arts colleges. You don't lecture, you always discuss. Well, I would venture to say that there is something important to be learned from listening to a well-constructed lecture, both in learning to pay attention for more than 3 minutes,
Right.
and also to see somebody who is masterful develop an argument.
Right.
So, ideally, platonically, if we send our students to Oxford and they listen to some of the public lectures, they have an experience unlike the experience they have here.
Right.
Also, the independence of being your own keeper. As a student, we have a completely different approach to higher education. We have assignments from day to day.
Right.
The syllabus is a wonderful instrument, but it is also a huge amount of control and instruction for the student. So I believe that for a student from Richmond and from many excellent American institutions, to spend a semester when they really have to mind the calendar, choose the readings, make sure that they actually remember something they read in the beginning of the semester at the end for a final comprehensive exam, is a very important aspect of becoming educated, and is a very important aspect of being a lifelong learner.
Mm-hmm.
We use that phrase very, very frequently, but what are we doing besides hopefully inspiring students to be lifelong learners? Do we really teach them skills for for being autodidacts?
Mm-hmm.
You know, so we started right away with the exchanges. And the other very important aspect for why exchanges was because this was such a provincial institution.
And you bring inbound students.
Exactly, you bring inbound students who, and here there's this huge advantage of having almost everything taught in a seminar format, right, that when you have exchange students and international students around the table, they bring a very different point of view to any issue that is being discussed. So you get a much greater benefit from their presence. And of course, our students were quite reluctant to go study abroad initially. What better way to give them inspiration and a sense of greater comfort than meeting students from the institution to which they will be going. That's right. I've often used the metaphor of creating a daisy chain of
mm-hmm.
students coming and going and feeling a great deal more comfort.
And as you get more students leaving and coming back to tell their story, it excites the other
That's
American
right.
students on campus too.
Exactly.
So you really do get this wheel rolling.
Absolutely. And reaching a certain critical mass is crucial. With the situation now that when students, many of the students who choose Richmond choose it already because they have heard through the grapevine or because they've looked on our website. But the grapevine is very, very important. That if you come to Richmond, studying abroad is going to be made easy in the sense that all the structural elements are in place and you're going to be encouraged to do it, and that your institutional financial aid is going to be
right.
Transferred. So this is already a self-perpetuating, to some extent,
I also
mechanism.
think it's important to note that because of institutional financial aid transferring, it is oftentimes private institutions who charge their regular tuition and fees to send their students abroad are able to send more lower income students
Absolutely.
than even public institutions sometimes.
Absolutely.
Because the money is there to help the students go in
That's
the
right.
context of what they already had planned to pay.
That's right, exactly.
So it's a
and
very
we,
important
our
component.
mantra is, if you can afford being on campus for a semester, you can afford being studying abroad for a semester.
Right.
Because, as you know, we also give students a travel stipend.
Right.
We even pay for a passport and visas and so on. But the whole point is...
And you pay for faculty passport.
Yes, we do. We
too.
offer faculty, yes, that we will pay for their passport. Anything to get everybody feel that they are citizens of the world.
Right.
But it is crucial if for anybody who wants to argue for study abroad to do something that will make study abroad available to at least all students who are not spending, who are not also working
Right.
half-time or something. That is unavoidable. Really, I see no way around that, except for doing short-term study. But if study abroad is an important element of the undergraduate education, which everybody seems to be arguing now, then we have to make sure that students who are on financial aid are included, and not only students who don't need financial aid.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we've talked a little bit about, I'm going to ask you to go back in a minute and do some things with this, but we've talked about international scholars inbound, we've talked about faculty development seminars, we've talked about study abroad and exchanges, we've talked about inbound students. I know that you do a lot of cultural programming on this campus and for the community of the city of Richmond. Can you talk a little bit about that too?
Yeah, we do a fair amount. I wish we did even more. And certainly in the creation of the International Center, we have taken that into account. The absolute jewel in our crown on that is the International Film Series, which was started some 22 years ago. Anybody who's looked at American cities and is interested in film will know that most American cities outside of New York and Washington and maybe a few others have very little by way of current international film. So with very little money, we started that series, and by now we show about 8 to 10 films each semester. Each film is shown 3 times, and each showing, each weekend, about 300 people come to see the films. It's a fascinating exercise in both bringing culture from around the world to the campus, but also bringing people from the community to the campus. One thing that I noticed years ago is that when we show an Iranian film, of course, the members of the Iranian immigrant community come dragging their kids behind them. When we started showing the Chinese films, the Chinese members of the Chinese community came, and so on and so on. So it does bring people, and most American cities, large and small, now have significant numbers of immigrants. So bringing people, that's one aspect of that outreach. The creation of the International Center has also resulted in a number of schools in the Richmond area bringing kids as young as 10 or so to come and experience the center. Because we have this beautiful rotating globe with a fountain underneath, kids go absolutely bonkers when they see it, so they love it, and it I think embeds itself in their memory. So we've seen many, many more school groups. We respond also to requests. I just had one this morning from local schools to invite international students to meet with the students. This is not a sort of ongoing, constant stream, but it is something we do quite regularly. And of course now we have a cafe that's open to everybody, and people really come. So our goal in various ways, and certainly Ed Ayers, who came to us from Charlottesville, is very keen on continuing the integration of the University of Richmond into its larger community. So we have a downtown outpost now with a law clinic and an art gallery. But the international side of it is very important. My argument has long been that it doesn't matter what kind of profession you're preparing for, you will need to be internationally educated. And one of my favorite examples is the question of preparing to be an elementary school teacher. If you're going to be an elementary school teacher in Louisa County or in Richmond, Virginia, or in Charlottesville, you will have immigrant kids, and either you diss them, you ignore them, or you help them and help the other kids to understand the
Sure.
complexity. That's right, to understand the complexity of human societies, the various arrangements, the familial differences, how kids are brought up, when do you speak, when you don't speak, what can you expect of your parents. It doesn't have to be articulated, it can be observed. And a good teacher who is attuned to the benefits of having a diverse group of students can bring all of this out to everybody's benefit.
I would like to ask you to take a step back and just give me some examples of international scholars who've been inbound, where you've done work with faculty development, and I know that your programs there are incredibly unique, both because of the prior and the post activities, as well as the ongoing travel activity that you engage in, some examples of study abroad, etc. Let me start, and then I'm going to end with your strategic plan, your endowment, and this amazing building and where you are today. But the reason I'm asking this is this week in the news, there's enormous upheaval across the Middle East in many countries. And I remember some years ago, you're telling me about you were about to leave for Yemen with a group of faculty, which I think is amazing and brilliant. So talk a little bit about where you've taken folks and why.
Well, the faculty seminar was predicated on three basic principles. One is that this was internationalization for all. So it was not intended for people who were already working in some international arena. So the priority was given to people who've never been out of the US, and there were plenty of them. The other was the issue of interdisciplinarity, that standing in front of the monument to Pushkin or to whatever, together, cheek to jowl, a historian, a political scientist, and a marketing specialist would understand that they knew the world very differently, because we all know the world from our disciplinary perspective and very rarely pay attention to the fact that that is both stilted and limited.
Right.
So that kind of exchange. Also, it was predicated on the fact that Western Europe was, or any place that was easy to get to and easy to navigate, was not going to be our priority, because those areas people should be able to do on their own dime. The faculty seminar, I should stress, is completely funded by the institution. And then we looked at where things were happening. Well, we started in 88, 89, and that was obviously an area that I knew very well. The things were cooking in Central and Eastern Europe as they are cooking now in the Middle East. So we did have 2 faculty seminars that went to Yugoslavia literally a year before the war broke out there. And we were in Czechoslovakia, we were in the Soviet Union, we were in Poland before the changes. We were in crucial moments. We were in the Deutsche Demokratische Republik, for God's sake, about 2 weeks before they shut down shop.
Wow.
We stood at Checkpoint Charlie when the West Berliners could already come and go, but we couldn't go across because we had a one single entry visa. They still were issuing visas. So after we had done Central and Eastern Europe and Southern Europe and Yugoslavia, I began to look at the curriculum and what areas were not at all present in it. And so it was very clear that the Middle East was terra incognita. There was nothing. So we did a faculty seminar, and I had invited an archaeologist from Jordan here for a semester, and after that he was our advisor, and so we went to Jordan, crossed over the Allenby Bridge to Israel, and before that we also went to Yemen, because we had one faculty member who had done some work in Yemen, and she suggested that Yemen would be an interesting place. So we went to Yemen. That year we went to Yemen, Syria, Damascus for a couple of days, 3 days, Israel, and Jordan. These are not intended to be in-depth studies of any area. This May we are going to Jamaica, Trinidad, because we've signed an exchange agreement with the University of West Indies, so the faculty need to get to know the campuses, and to Panama, which is very underrepresented on this campus, and yet we receive students from Panama, and then we're going to go to Cuba. The policy on Cuba, by the way, changed after we had decided to go already. So
good.
We have this record of
Right.
doing things in advance. So yes, it is always focused on places which are underrepresented in our curriculum and underrepresented in our also sort of human population. That's why we had gone to Colombia and Brazil and Argentina at one time, and also to West Africa.
What percentage of the faculty do you think you've been able to reach through these seminars?
By now, if you just count participants versus the total size of the population, it is between a third and a half of faculty members who have at some point participated in the faculty seminar. But of course, some people are
come and
come and go, and so on. But it is, and what is very interesting is that each seminar has a huge spread in age. So people who are finishing their first year, and people who are close to, who are full professors, and again, when it comes to discussing pedagogy, these are fascinating opportunities. You know, you roll through the rice fields of Vietnam, and there is the discussion in the back of the bus about what works in the classroom and what doesn't work in the classroom.
That's lovely.
Those are really, serendipity, of course, is a very important element in doing good work.
And how do you continue to fund these?
This is all institutional funding. It
So
comes until now, I would get a budget from the provost. From now on, it's going to go directly into the budget of the Dean of International Education.
Wow.
Yeah.
So your institution has stepped up to the plate in the way that many institutions across the country have not yet done.
That's right. Very few have, and the Rollins College is sort of notorious because the president came in and decided that every faculty member would get $1,000 per year for international studies, and they can accumulate that for 3 years. But what it doesn't have is the kind of structured approach that we have, and that's, you know, there are arguments that can be made on either side. You know, letting faculty members do whatever they will do. The advantage of our approach, I think, is that we have a whole semester. In the spring semester, we meet some 10 times with everybody making presentations from their disciplinary perspective to an interdisciplinary group.
That's fantastic.
Okay? And everybody, that we create a reading list together, and so everybody gets to know each other and to understand the locale where we are going through these different lenses, disciplinary lenses. And then everybody has to write a report. It can be in any kind of format. Nobody has to sign on the dotted line that they will teach a new course, but the assumption is that it will all enter into both the teaching pool, the thinking pool, the whole sort of, and also there are strings attached. We count on people who've gone on a faculty seminar to understand the study abroad structures and to be better advisors for study abroad, to be dedicated to international students and so on, because all of these things are discussed in this very extended period of discussions.
So it's very integrated into your curriculum.
It is.
I know that sometime in the early 2000s there was a strategic plan that took the organization on paper to another step and included international education, as I understand it, in its mission. And by then, of course, you had all of these things in place, and I assume the strategic plan helped you move those forward.
We actually created a separate strategic plan for international education, and that was the product of a very extensive period of work by a number of different faculty committees, and that strategic plan really codified our approach to internationalization, because it did discuss all of these areas in a synchronized, cohesive manner. It also set out a goal of 80% of participation and study abroad.
Where are you at this point?
Well, at this point we are sort of at about 60, but we are counting, though, not participation but bodies. So if we counted whenever a student goes twice, we would be over 70, but it's just a question of how you count it. So over 60% of our students graduate with some study abroad experience, and most of them a semester.
And considering that 3% of the American undergraduate population goes abroad still today, that's a remarkable statistic.
It is really pretty good. And we still are moving forward. The athletic department has been charged with developing some sort of a plan which will make it possible for the athletes to have an international experience. We are looking forward to that. That's very important. So the interesting thing is that our current strategic plan, which was developed by President Ayers, does not sort of name internationalization as a specific one of the 5 pillars of the strategic plan. And I had a very interesting conversation with him in which he said he felt that we were doing so well on the issue of internationalization that there was no need to include it. Of course, we do say in our mission statement that we are developing citizens of the world for productive work and so on. But strategic plans are useful to the extent to which they are made to come to life.
Exactly. And that leads me to today.
Yeah.
We have about 5 to 10 minutes left. And I'd like to talk to you about your title, which is no longer director, but dean, and Carol Weinstein, faculty member. And I would like to talk about this unbelievable center, where I noticed the globe that you talk about, it's 8 feet tall, with water rushing down the side, is directly across from the Office of Admissions as well, which I think sends a real message to. So tell me about you and your title and your progression, and Carol Weinstein and the alumni funding and this incredible center.
Right. When I started this work and was director of Director for International Education, it was obviously a very small operation with, as I said, 2 people initially, and then one more and one more. We are now 11 people in the office, so we've come a long way. Soon after I started, probably within a year or 2 after I started this work, Carol Weinstein, who was at that time teaching as an adjunct in our English department, was very struck by the fact that her students were still very provincial, and that she would like to give at least a couple of them some opportunity to get out of the country. And so initially, as she says very humbly, she gave one of her students a little money to go and explore her origins in Scandinavia or something. Then she gave some money to a student who went to Israel. But she was very dissatisfied with it, and somebody said, well, why don't you, there is now this new office, a new person, why don't you go and talk to Uliana? And that's how our collaboration and a very profound friendship started. She was very intent on having an impact on transforming the university, and so was I. The difference was that she had some significant fiscal resources, and I had the work ethic and the ideas for specific implementation. And so we really have been working together. Initially, she contributed some money every year for programmatic work in this office, and we developed eventually a program for some Carol Weinstein scholars. This is some funding for international students, which helps some of them. And then she decided to go for a chair, which means $1 million, and that's how I went from being director to also being a chairholder. But in between, when I started reporting to the provost, I was director, and then I was associate provost for international education. Then we went provostless under a previous president, and that's when my title changed from associate provost to dean of international education. That's where it stayed. But the center was the next huge step in funding. Obviously, Carol Weinstein, with the support of her husband Marcus, had contributed another $9 or $9.5 million to create the center, and the university added another half. The goal of the center is really to approach internationalization comprehensively, to make this a centerpiece of the institution. And of course, locating it, as you said, across from admissions means that every tour of the campus starts by the group walking through our beautiful courtyard and hearing about all of the international opportunities that students have when they come here. The center has three departments: the Department of Latin American and Iberian Studies, the Department of Modern Languages, Literatures and Cultures, Department of Geography, but also the American Studies major, which we are working hard to internationalize with a $1 million grant from the Mellon Foundation, the International Studies major, and 7 faculty members from the law school. So there is a kind of umbrella, and we have the International Commons, which you've seen on the ground floor across from the Office of International Education, which hosts all kinds of activities. A couple that I would like to stress were Skype sessions with our alumni who are out there in the world. And this is a series which we will be continuing, but the first one was with an alumnus from 2009 who was in the Congo, heading the first team that got to the 200 raped women.
Oh my God.
And we could speak to him, and the students could speak to him while he was there in the Congo. And the second one was with an alumnus from 3 or 4 years ago who was a native of Azerbaijan. He graduated from Richmond, went back to Baku, and started an NGO of young people who wanted to keep tabs on the government, which is quite oppressive and corrupt. And after they created a YouTube piece dressed in donkey outfits, talking about the government spending huge amounts of money on buying donkeys from West Germany, if you can believe that, he was arrested, spent 17 months in jail, and as soon as he was released, we were able to Skype him.
Wow.
Again, our students were talking to this student in his apartment in Baku. What better use for technology and for educating students for the world? An American student in the Congo, an Azeri student in Baku, and our students who are here now on campus. That's pretty powerful, I think.
I think this is a good note upon which to end this interview, because I think it shows, as this discussion has, a number of things. You've had wonderful support from your colleagues and faculty. You've also developed that support in your faculty and developed it by helping them
Yes.
do things they might otherwise never have been able to do. You've had good support from your administration. In fact, in some areas, spectacular support. And with Carol Weinstein and her husband Marcus and others, you've had terrific support from alumni as well. But I also, since this is an interview of you, want to say that could all be there, but if there's not someone in the center making things happen, it won't happen. Fruition doesn't occur by accident.
Right.
So you are to be widely recognized for what you have done, both at the University of Richmond and in this field. I have been interviewing Uliana Gabara, Dean, and Carol Weinstein, Chair of International Education at the University of Richmond. I'm Joan Gore with the Foundation for International Education and the University of Virginia. It's been my privilege to do this, and I get to go see the center. I'm very lucky to be here, so thank you all very much.
Thank you.